Don't open that door, mister. Someone was under your car this morning.
The voice cut clean through the soft, peaceful morning in Pasadena like a crack of thunder. Jonathan Ree, 46, paused mid-motion, his hand still resting on the handle of his slate-gray Porsche. The car gleamed under the California sun, a mirror-polished reflection of wealth and control. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Across the narrow street, a small black girl in purple pajama pants and a worn hoodie stood barefoot on her front lawn, breathing hard. A sketch pad still clutched in one hand. Her curls were messy, her eyes wide with panic, not mischief, not play, real panic.
Jonathan frowned. What did you say? The girl took a hesitant step forward. I saw him, a man. He had gloves on. He was under your car before sunrise. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper now. I think he put something there. Jonathan's instincts, honed more for boardrooms than bomb threats, rebelled at the absurdity. He was due to drive 100 miles south to San Diego in just over an hour, where the new Reese satellite office would open with minimal press, exactly the way he preferred it. No security convoy, no assistant, just the open highway and a speech waiting on a thumb drive. But something about the girl's expression stopped him. Not the fear, but the effort, the risk it took for a child to raise her voice to a stranger like him. He crouched slightly, peering beneath the chassis. At first, nothing. Then, just behind the front, a sliver of matte black, a rectangular object with a faint red pulse of light blinking, blinking, blinking. Jonathan's breath hitched. He backed away slowly, his spine stiff with disbelief. His phone was already in his hand. Graves, I need you at the Pasadena house. Bring everyone. 22 minutes later, two unmarked black SUVs slid to a halt beside the curb, discharging 4 members of his private security team in Navy tactical gear. The street remained eerily quiet. The only sound, the soft squeal of birdsong above. The lead agent, a square-jawed woman named McCrae, crouched and nodded grimly. Sir, it's a motion-sensitive explosive, triggered by pressure and acceleration. If you'd hit the gas, Jonathan said nothing. His mouth was dry. He glanced across the street. The little girl was still there, half hidden behind the hydrangea bush. Her sketchpad now pressed to her chest like armor. Jonathan crossed the street slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, trying to calm his racing heart. He stopped a few feet from her. What's your name? She looked up, wary. Zariah. Zariah Ellis. How old are you? Zariah, 8. You live here? She nodded. With my mom. She works nights. Ah, you were awake early. Zariah bit her lip. I draw in the mornings. I saw the man before the sun came up. He had a hood. He kept looking over his shoulder. Her small hands gripped the edges of the paper. I thought he was stealing, but then I saw the wires and the blinking. Jonathan crouched to her level. He wasn't good with kids. He'd never had the time or the temperament, but something about this child's quiet bravery undid him. You saved my life, he said softly. Zariah blinked. I wasn't sure. I almost didn't say anything. But you did, Jonathan replied. That's what matters. From behind them, the bomb squad arrived.
Police cordoned off the area.
Neighbors began to gather at their windows, confused and concerned. Jonathan stood slowly, his gaze still on Zariah. In her tiny hand, the drawing she had been working on was now visible. A sketch of the Porsche driveway, and the man in the hoodie crouched beneath it. The lines were crude, but unmistakable. His voice was quiet.
"May I see that?" Zariah hesitated, then handed it to him.
Jonathan studied the drawing, his eyes narrowing at the shape of the figure's wrist.
Something hanging from it.
A chain, a small letter-shaped pendant.
Something about it felt wrong, familiar.
A tug in his chest started low, like a knot slowly tightening. He turned to his head of security, who had just finished a hushed call. "Graves, I want security footage from every house on this block. I want facial recognition run on any match and get me everything you can on this girl's family."
"Sir," Graves blinked.
"I'm not turning this into a press story," Jonathan said. "But I owe her more than words."
Zariah still stood silently. She didn't smile. She didn't ask for thanks.
And Jonathan Ree, millionaire genius, self-made man, felt something shift deep inside him. He'd nearly died this morning, and the only reason he hadn't was a child who had no reason to care but did anyway. And he couldn't shake the thought.
What if I hadn't listened? He looked down at the sketch again, and this time he noticed the wrist, the chain, the pendant, a single letter, K. Karen, his wife, his breath stilled in his chest.
The thought slithered in like a shadow.
What if this wasn't random? What if the real danger had been sleeping beside him all along? Jonathan sat motionless in his study that night.
Lights dimmed, the glow of a paused security feed flickering across his face. Outside, the Pasadena sky was fading into a deep navy. But inside, his world had narrowed into a single question that wouldn't leave him.
Was Karen involved?
He had spent years building a life defined by logic, strategy, control, but this was chaos laced with betrayal. On screen, the grainy footage from 4:56 a.m. showed a man in a dark hoodie walking up his driveway. The image was barely distinguishable, but then came the moment that turned Jonathan cold. At exactly 4:57, as the man knelt by the Porsche, the camera caught a sliver of light reflecting off a pendant around his wrist. Zoomed in, pixelated, but unmistakable, a small gold charm in the shape of a K dangling from a delicate chain.
Karen had worn that same pendant for years, ever since they'd met. He'd given it to her when Reese hit its first million in revenue. She said it reminded her where it all began.
His mind raced through every conversation, every look she'd given him over the past few months. She'd been distant lately, yes, claiming stress, late-night charity events, quiet phone calls behind closed doors. He'd chalked it up to the strain of running the company's community arm. But now, with this image seared into his memory, everything looked different.
Graves entered the room quietly, holding a manila folder and a USB drive.
"We ran facial match on the footage.
No conclusive ID yet.
The hoodie blocks most features, but we enhanced the video from the Ellis home."
He plugged the USB into the television and played a second angle, this time from a ring cam across the street.
The image sharpened, not perfect, but clearer.
Jonathan leaned forward.
The man's posture, the way he moved, subtle, familiar, his gait was uneven, the left foot dragging slightly.
Jonathan froze. "You see it?" Graves asked. He nodded slowly. That limp. I know that walk. He rubbed his temple. It was coming back in fragments now. An old name, a buried chapter. Kyle Merrick, Karen's ex, an amateur software developer who had tried to sue Jonathan early in his career for idea theft. The case was dropped for lack of evidence, but Jonathan had always suspected Kyle was merely a puppet, egged on by someone hungrier for revenge. Karen had never spoken of Kyle after they married. Jonathan stood up, walking slowly to the window, arms crossed. Check if Kyle Merrick has any recent aliases, addresses, rentals, anything near Pasadena. Graves nodded, then hesitated. What about the girl, Zariah? Jonathan turned. What about her? We dug into her background as you asked. Single mother, her name's Marcia Ellis. Works night shift at Huntington Memorial as a janitor. No criminal record. Struggles to make rent but always pays on time. The girl's never been in trouble at school. Her teachers describe her as quiet, observant, gifted. Jonathan was quiet for a beat. Set up a security watch on their house. Quietly, no uniforms. I don't want anyone using them as leverage. Graves paused at the door. Sir, do you want me to contact the police? Jonathan shook his head. Not yet. We're not handing this off until we know what we're dealing with. After Graves left, Jonathan picked up the sketch Zariah had drawn. He studied the jagged lines again, the crouching man, the glowing light, the chain. He remembered her eyes that morning, wide, frightened, but determined. She had spoken up when most adults would have stayed silent. There was something in that kind of courage that money couldn't replicate. A soft ping broke his thoughts, an email from the insurance office. Karen had filed a recent adjustment to his life insurance policy just 3 weeks ago. A sudden increase, beneficiary unchanged. Karen Ree. He stared at the screen, bile rising in his throat. He hadn't even known the policy was up for review. She must have done it under the guise of routine estate planning, something their lawyers usually handled together. But this one had gone through her office. He scrolled further. The payout was now $20 million. He closed the laptop with more force than necessary. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He kept hearing Zariah's voice in his head over and over. Someone was under your car this morning. By sunrise, he was parked outside the Ellis home in an unmarked SUV. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't know what he would say. He just knew he needed to see her. The little girl who saw what no one else did, who trusted her gut and screamed anyway. He knocked gently. Marcia Ellis answered, still in her scrubs, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She recognized him instantly. I'm sorry, she said quickly, clutching the collar of her robe. If she caused trouble, she saved my life, Jonathan cut in. Please, may I speak with her? Marcia hesitated, then stepped aside. She's in her room. I'll call her. Moments later, Zariah came downstairs, still in pajamas, her curls tied back this time. She stopped at the edge of the living room rug. Jonathan knelt to meet her eyes. Hi, Zariah. Hi, she said, her voice small. I wanted to thank you properly. You did something very brave yesterday. She nodded shyly, glancing down.
You trusted yourself when no one else could see what you saw. That takes strength. Zariah looked up. I was scared. I know, Jonathan said softly. I was too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked, Are you going to be okay? Jonathan gave a faint smile. I think so. Thanks to you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small rectangular box wrapped in navy ribbon. This is for you. It's just pencils. Good ones. I heard you like to draw. Zariah's eyes lit up. She took the box with both hands, fingers brushing the ribbon. Thank you. Jonathan stood. Keep drawing. Sometimes the way we see the world is the thing that saves it. Marcia returned to the room just as he reached the door. Why did you come here really? She asked, voice low but firm. Jonathan looked back. Because your daughter reminded me what it means to see clearly, and I intend to repay that clarity one way or another. Then he stepped into the California morning, the air heavy with the knowledge that his life had changed, and not just because of the bomb. By noon that same day, Jonathan was back in his downtown Los Angeles office, high above the city's blur of steel and traffic. The floor-to-ceiling windows glared with sun, but he barely noticed. His desk was littered with papers, insurance files, printed screenshots from the security feed, and a slim leather folder labeled Karen Ree Internal Activity Log. Across from him sat Mr. Graves, calm as always, tapping a pen against his knee. She hasn't left the estate all morning, Graves reported. Her personal assistant said she canceled 2 meetings, but we traced a call to a burner phone just after the news broke about the bomb unit in Pasadena. Call lasted 38 seconds. Tower data puts it near the estate. We're working on a trace. Jonathan nodded without speaking. He felt an ache rise behind his eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from the sheer weight of betrayal tightening around his chest like a coil. The woman he'd shared a home, a name, and a company with had increased his life insurance weeks before someone tried to blow up his car. The same woman who once whispered in his ear, I believe in you more than the board ever will. She'd stood with him at investor dinners, public launches, funerals, and now she might be standing beside the man who planted a bomb under his Porsche. Graves laid another file in front of him. We pulled Karen's travel receipts from the last 6 months. 3 trips to San Francisco, each one coinciding with conference weekends hosted by Merrick Data Solutions. Jonathan stared at the name, Kyle Merrick. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in almost a decade, but the memory burned sharp. A failed lawsuit, whispered accusations, then the sudden disappearance of the man himself. Kyle hadn't just lost the case, he lost credibility, investors, and reputation. But it seemed he hadn't lost Karen. We confirmed hotel overlap, Graves added. They were staying at the same locations, 2 floors apart. Jonathan's jaw clenched. How long? Graves hesitated. Maybe a year, maybe longer. Jonathan pushed back from the desk and stood, pacing. What else? There's more, Graves said, lowering his voice. We accessed a backup from Karen's personal assistant's cloud. There's a memo draft never sent, but autosaved. He slid over a printed sheet. Jonathan picked it up. Subject, Post-Transition Strategy. After the tragic loss of Jonathan, our priority will be stabilizing shareholder confidence.
Reese's leadership must reflect vision and continuity. Karen will assume interim CEO with the full support of the advisory board. He didn't finish reading.
They were planning the obituary, Jonathan muttered.
Graves didn't respond. Jonathan dropped the page onto the desk. They thought it would look like a highway accident.
I was going to die in a fireball on I-5. His voice was empty, not anger, not grief, just cold realization. They almost pulled it off, he whispered.
Graves stepped forward. Sir, we can go to the police.
You have enough to start a formal inquiry.
Not yet, Jonathan said.
I want every name Karen contacted over the past 60 days.
Anyone she met alone?
Anyone who suddenly took vacation or got a raise.
You think the rot goes deeper? I think I've been running a company I don't recognize anymore. He turned toward the window again. His reflection looked older than he remembered.
Grayer, thinner, and behind his own eyes, something else had begun to stir.
Not just pain, but resolve. I'm going to clean house, Graves.
Every floor, every office, quietly, but completely.
Graves nodded once. And the girl? Jonathan didn't answer for a long moment. She's the only reason I'm still standing, he said. And if they even suspect she sought anything else, she's in danger. We've already rotated 2 plainclothes guards outside their house. We'll keep her safe.
Good, Jonathan said, because she didn't just see a crime, she saw the truth, and sometimes that's even more dangerous. Later that evening, Jonathan sat alone in his private suite above the office.
He didn't go home. He didn't want to see Karen's clothes hanging in their walk-in closet.
Didn't want to smell her perfume lingering on the staircase. Instead, he sat with a bourbon in his hand, staring at the wall. There was a time, not so long ago, when he believed loyalty was unbreakable. That trust once earned was permanent. But as the events of the last 48 hours unraveled everything he thought he knew, he realized something else.
Trust isn't a foundation. It's a wager. And sometimes people bet against you.
He thought about Soraya, about the way her voice had cracked with fear, and yet she still screamed. She had nothing to gain, no headlines, no spotlight, and yet she did what most adults wouldn't. In the silence, he whispered to himself, she saw me.
Not the money, not the name, just me.
A knock at the suite door snapped him out of the thought.
It was Graves again. We found something else. Jonathan took the folder, flipping it open.
Inside was a printed email timestamped from 4 months ago, sent from Karen's private server.
Subject line, KM contingency option. The content was brief, clinical. If the insurance goes through, we'll use the proxy votes to trigger the transfer. The public will sympathize, and once Ree is out of the way, the board will fold. Jonathan stared at the word out of the way. They hadn't just wanted him gone. They wanted him erased. He looked up at Graves. Get me legal and make sure no one leaks this. If I go down, I'll take them all with me. Understood. Oh, Graves. Yes, sir. When this is over, we're going to rewrite the company handbook. Graves raised a brow. You mean literally?
I mean, from now on, loyalty comes with teeth. And Jonathan looked once more at the skyline outside his office, the city blinking blindly into dusk. He wasn't the same man who walked to that car yesterday morning. He wasn't sure who he was now. But one thing was certain. Whoever tried to bury him had underestimated the one rule he lived by. Survivors don't forget. They prepare. 2 days later, Karen Ree stood in the center of the Reese Tech boardroom, smiling graciously beneath the soft glow of recessed lighting. Her black tailored dress fit like a statement, elegant, precise, strategic. Around her sat 11 members of the executive board, sipping espresso and flipping through briefing packets. The agenda read, long-term succession planning and crisis response preparedness. Jonathan Ree was not in the room. Karen cleared her throat delicately. As you all know, Jonathan is taking a brief personal leave due to the attempted attack on his life. He's requested I step in as interim executive liaison to maintain stability across operations. A few board members nodded. Others exchanged glances, unreadable. Karen's voice remained calm, composed. Our top priority is preserving confidence in the brand, the company, and the legacy we've built together. She let the word "we" hang in the air just long enough. No one questioned her. No one raised the obvious. Jonathan hadn't made any formal statement. There was no press release, no video address. He had simply gone quiet. And that, Karen thought, was the beauty of it, because in silence power repositions itself. As the meeting progressed, her phone buzzed silently in her purse. One buzz, then two, then three. She waited, finished her sentence, closed the session with applause and a smile. Only once she was alone did she check the messages. Unknown number. I know what you did. Meet me. Midnight. 1417 Warner Avenue. Come alone. Karen's hand froze mid-scroll. She read it again and again. Her heart didn't race, but her mind moved like a scalpel. She deleted the thread and slipped the phone back into her bag. She had a good idea who had sent it. And if he had survived, then she'd underestimated him more than she thought. That same evening, Jonathan sat in the back of an unmarked SUV parked 2 blocks away from the Warner Avenue address. It was a rundown warehouse load abandoned since the mid-90s, now home to graffiti, broken glass, and nesting pigeons. Next to him sat Graves, scanning the perimeter with a handheld monitor. She came alone, Graves said, nodding toward the far end of the alley. Black sedan, parked, no backup. Jonathan watched Karen step out of the vehicle, phone in one hand, the other gripping a small purse. Her posture was flawless as always, controlled, deliberate. He clenched his jaw. Is the building clean? We swept it twice, Graves replied. Audio and visual set. No lethal surprises. She'll think she's walking into a confrontation. She won't know she's walking into confession. Jonathan gave a single nod and exited the SUV. The warehouse door creaked open on rusted hinges. Karen entered cautiously, heels tapping softly on the concrete. She looked around the cavernous space, half expecting to see police, a trap, a drone. What she saw instead was Jonathan standing beside a folding table alone, sleeves rolled up, no bodyguards in sight. He looked thinner, harder, like someone who'd been stripped down to truth. John, she said softly, slipping into her well-worn smile. You look alive, he said. Surprised?
She hesitated. Of course, I'm relieved. I've been worried. Were you worried before or after you filed the second policy? He asked. Her lips parted, then closed again. I know about the calls, Karen. The hotel meetings, Kyle Merrick, the fake proxy memos, the burner phones, the strategy brief. Her mask cracked, but only slightly. I don't know what you think you found, but I found enough, Jonathan snapped, his voice echoing sharply in the empty space. Enough to know this wasn't about an argument or revenge or resentment. It was about replacing me. Quietly, permanently. Karen tilted her head. You left a power vacuum, Jonathan. For years, you've been more focused on buildings than people, on systems, not succession. You made Ree into your altar but forgot to anoint a priest. He stepped forward slowly. And your solution was to light the altar on fire. She said nothing. You could have walked, he continued. You had every option. You wanted the company, the name, the spotlight, but you also wanted to wear the widow's dress, didn't you? You wanted sympathy to cover strategy. Karen's eyes glinted. You always did underestimate how easily people believe grief. He studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the far wall. A red light blinked faintly, recording everything. I wanted to give you a chance, he said. One chance to say it out loud. To admit it mattered enough to you to kill. But Karen only smiled. Cold. Impeccable. I didn't kill you, Jonathan. She said, you're still here. He let out a breath, almost a laugh. No, I'm not. She frowned. That version of me, the one who trusted you with everything, he's gone. He picked up a small remote from the table and clicked it. The sidewall flickered to life, revealing a live feed of the entire boardroom, Graves sitting inside, already playing the footage from the warehouse to the stunned executives. Karen's blood ran cold. They're watching us, she said, her voice tightening. They're not just watching, Jonathan said. They're voting. Within minutes, her phone buzzed again. One notification, internal access revoked, followed by another. Personal email deactivated, then a third. Legal action pending. Karen stared at him. For the first time, her voice shook. You're making a mistake. No, he said, turning away. I'm correcting one. She stepped forward, lips curled. They'll still remember me. Jonathan paused at the threshold of the warehouse door. They might, he said, but only as the woman who tried to erase the wrong man and ended up erasing herself. Then he walked out into the cool Los Angeles night, leaving her behind in a warehouse of silence, where her own ambition had finally echoed too loud to be ignored. The morning after Karen's fall from grace, the air at Ree's headquarters was oddly still. The receptionist spoke in hushed tones. Executives walked with eyes averted. The logo above the lobby shimmered with artificial light, but the usual confidence in the halls had evaporated. Everyone had seen the footage. Everyone had heard the calm betrayal dressed in silk. Jonathan Ree arrived just after 8 a.m. wearing a dark gray suit with no tie. His steps were slow but certain. He no longer moved like a CEO protecting his image. He moved like a man unafraid of shadows. In the executive lounge, Graves handed him the latest update. Karen's legal team has gone silent.
Her attorney asked for a quiet settlement. No press, but the damage is already out there. Jonathan nodded without looking up. Let them run. The silence will speak louder than headlines. Graves hesitated. There's one more thing. Jonathan raised a brow. The man in the hoodie. We got a match. Jonathan's hand froze on the page he was flipping. Kyle Merrick, Graves said, no. His brother, Devin Merrick. Same build, same limp. Kyle's been living in Canada for 2 years. Devin, however, showed up in San Diego 6 weeks ago using a false ID. Karen wired money to a shell company that led back to him. Jonathan leaned in. So she used the brother of a former enemy, a name I'd recognize, but not easily. It was personal, but obscured. She didn't want the kill traced back to anyone obvious, Graves nodded. The money trail ends yesterday. He's gone dark again, but we're still tracking financial signals. There's a good chance he'll resurface. Jonathan exhaled through his nose. Keep digging quietly. Then for a moment, his gaze shifted to the large window behind Graves. Across the street, the city pulsed with its own rhythm: cars, lights, ordinary lives moving forward. And yet, in one of those homes, a girl named Zariah was getting ready for school like nothing had changed. But everything had. Zariah sat in the back seat of a modest silver Toyota, her backpack on her lap, fingers drumming against the zipper. Her mother, Marcia, glanced at her through the rearview mirror as she backed out of the driveway. You doing okay, baby? Zariah nodded. I guess. You're awfully quiet. I just keep thinking. What if I hadn't yelled that day? What if I just stayed quiet? Marcia smiled softly. But you didn't. I almost did. But you didn't, Marcia repeated, her voice firmer. Sweetheart, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are. And Zariah looked out the window, watching the neighborhood blur by. Do you think he's still in danger? Marcia hesitated before answering. I think people like Mr. Ree have to look over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. That's just part of what happens when you have too much power. Zariah thought for a moment. He didn't seem powerful when he thanked me. He looked small. Marcia glanced at her in the mirror again, eyes softening. Maybe that's the first time in a long time he saw the world clearly. Later that day, Jonathan stood in front of the main conference room, now converted into a temporary training hall. Dozens of employees sat inside expecting a standard operations review. Instead, Jonathan walked up to the mic, cleared his throat, and said, "We're not doing slides today." A few murmurs rippled through the room. I've spent the last 48 hours re-evaluating everything I thought I understood about this company and myself. He paused, scanning the faces in the room. We built Reese on innovation, on leadership, on ambition. But we forgot something. We forgot people. Silence settled. There's no algorithm for trust, no quarterly metric for integrity, and no app that replaces conscience. Someone in the front row shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan continued. A child reminded me of that. A little girl with no reason to speak up. But who did anyway? She saw danger when I was too distracted to see it myself. And because of her, I'm still standing here." He let the words sink in. "So, starting next quarter, we're launching a new initiative, the Ellis Fellowship. It'll fund full scholarships for children in underserved communities who show exceptional courage and curiosity." He paused again. "We don't just need more engineers. We need more people like her." Soft applause began, then grew louder. As the room clapped, Jonathan allowed himself a breath he hadn't taken in days. It wasn't justice, but it was a beginning. That evening, Jonathan returned to the Ellis household. This time, he didn't bring an entourage or a security detail, just a paper bag filled with lemon muffins from the neighborhood bakery and a handwritten note. Marcia answered the door with a tired smile. "Twice in 1 week, Mr. Ree. You're going to spoil her." She's earned it," Jonathan replied. She stepped aside and let him in. Zariah sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, sketch pad in hand. She looked up, surprised. "I brought snacks," Jonathan said, lifting the bag. Zariah grinned. "You brought lemon? I was told it's your favorite." He sat down beside her on the carpet. For a while, neither spoke. She kept sketching. He just watched. Eventually, she turned the pad around to show him the drawing. A tall man in a suit standing next to a small girl holding a flashlight, both facing a dark tunnel together. Jonathan looked at it for a long moment. "That's us," she nodded. "You gave me the flashlight," he said quietly. "You were in the dark," Zariah replied. He nodded again. Then she added, almost offhandedly, "You should be careful, though. People like the dark. Sometimes they don't want to be found." Jonathan looked at her, both amused and strangely humbled. "You sound older than you are." Zariah shrugged. "That's what my teacher says." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is for your future. A little something to say thank you and a promise. A promise that I won't forget what you did. And I won't let it be for nothing." She took the envelope and held it like it weighed something important. Jonathan stood, his voice softer now. "You reminded me that heroes don't always wear armor. Sometimes they wear pajamas and carry crayons." As he turned to leave, Zariah called after him. "Mr. Ree?" He paused. "Are you scared now?" He considered that. "No," he said at last. "Not anymore." The morning light filtered through the windows of Reese Tech's legal division like golden dust. Quiet and still. But inside Jonathan's private office, the mood was anything but calm. Graves stood by the monitor, flipping through camera feeds and data logs while speaking into his headset. No movement on Devon Merrick's accounts in the last 12 hours. He's either gone underground or someone helped him disappear. Jonathan sat at his desk, notepad untouched, eyes fixed on the loan file in front of him. It was a profile, paper thin but heavy in meaning. Devon's last known appearance. A motel in Ensenada. A digital signature traced back to a prepaid phone Karen had once used. "He's cleaning the trail," Jonathan muttered. "Burning what's left." Graves took off his earpiece and turned. "The authorities are slow-walking the case. No one wants to admit a CEO was nearly assassinated by his own wife and her ghost contractor. It's embarrassing for law enforcement, especially when the threat wasn't neutralized. Jonathan leaned back, eyes closing for a brief second. We can't wait for justice. We make it ourselves. Graves studied him. You're thinking of setting bait. No, Jonathan said quietly. I'm thinking of finishing what she started. Only this time, on my terms. Graves tilted his head. Explain. Jonathan stood, walking toward the window. Devon won't vanish forever. He's desperate. He has nothing left. No allies, no job, and no purpose without Karen. But there's one thing he still believes in. That I'm the reason he lost everything. And if he thinks he can still complete the mission, he'll try again. You want him to? I want him to believe I'm vulnerable. Jonathan turned, eyes sharp. We release a controlled leak, rumors that I've gone soft, that I'm pulling out of the public eye, stepping away from the company completely, enough to make him think it's his last window. Graves raised a brow. And when he comes back, Jonathan's tone dropped. We'll be ready. That afternoon, the plan was already in motion. An anonymous leak trickled through the business channels. Jonathan Ree contemplating early retirement after personal trauma. The board had pressured him to rest. His health was uncertain. No official statement, just enough to stir whispers. Meanwhile, Jonathan arranged one final public appearance before his so-called retreat. Not a press conference, not a corporate meeting, but a school visit. Why is everyone so dressed up? Zariah asked, adjusting the bow in her hair. Marcia smoothed the shoulders of her daughter's cardigan, smiling faintly. They said there's a guest coming. Someone important. Zariah squinted. Is it him? Marcia gave a half shrug. Maybe. They didn't say. The auditorium of Jefferson Elementary was filled with folding chairs, poster boards with crayon rainbows, and third graders fidgeting in their seats. Teachers whispered and glanced at their watches. Then, just after 10 a.m., the double doors opened. Jonathan Ree stepped in with security guards, but with a stack of books under one arm and a soft expression rarely seen on magazine covers. The children fell silent. Even the teachers looked unsure whether to stand or bow. Jonathan smiled. Can I sit? Zariah raised her hand. You already are. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. He sat on the edge of the small stage and spoke like he wasn't in a boardroom for once. I was saved by someone about your age. She saw something no one else saw, and instead of staying quiet, she acted. A teacher dabbed her eyes discreetly. Jonathan lifted a book and read for a few minutes, his voice steady but gentle. When he finished, he looked down at the class. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. He turned to Zariah, who sat a little straighter. After the event, he knelt beside her chair and spoke in a low voice only she could hear. I need you to be careful, Zariah. Someone may not be happy that you helped me, but I promise I won't let anyone hurt you. Zariah nodded, lips pressed tight. I'm not scared. Jonathan gave a faint smile. Then you're already ahead of most adults I know. That night, as the city began to dim under a warm twilight, Jonathan stood alone on his penthouse balcony. Below him, Los Angeles buzzed with normal-size horns, lights, chatter.
But he felt the tension in the air, invisible, but unmistakable. The stillness before a storm. The bait was set. The rumor had spread. And if Devon was watching, he wouldn't be able to resist. Just past midnight, Graves called. "We have movement." Jonathan didn't ask where. He was already grabbing his coat. An hour later, a silent alert pinged at the rear entrance of his secondary property, an unlisted home just outside Burbank, which the leaked report had implied was his new retreat house. Devon Merrick had taken the bait. He entered through the back, disarmed the alarm like a professional. But what he didn't know was that every motion, every breath was being fed live to a command van station 3 blocks away. Inside the house, all lights were off except for one faint bulb glowing above a dining table. A folder sat there unsealed. Inside it, photographs, surveillance stills of Karen handing Devon a burner phone, bank transfer screenshots, the insurance policy, and on top a single note. "This ends with truth. You pick how." Devon froze, staring at the files. Behind him, the door opened. Jonathan stepped in alone, unarmed, hands empty. Devon turned, startled, but didn't run. "You followed her orders once," Jonathan said, voice low. "What happens now that she's gone?" Devon's jaw tightened. "You ruined my brother's life. He made choices. So did you. And here we are." "I didn't plan to kill you," Devon said, voice cracking. "Not at first, but then I watched you. The way people followed you. The way you walked like nothing could touch you." Jonathan stepped forward. "You wanted to prove that even giants can fall." Devon nodded. "You were supposed to burn." Jonathan's gaze was still. "But I didn't, and neither did she. You both failed." Silence stretched long between them. Then the red lights flashed outside the window, sirens, silent but pulsing. Devon didn't flinch. "I guess it's over." Jonathan nodded. "Yeah, for you." He turned to leave, but not for me. The morning after Devon Merrick's arrest, Jonathan stood in the Reese press room, a space he had rarely used in the past. The room, polished and austere, was now filled with reporters, employees, and a camera crew broadcasting live to a national audience. He didn't wear a power tie, no podium, no teleprompter, just a microphone and a man who had decided he would stop hiding from the truth. "Good morning," he began, voice steady. "I know many of you have questions about what's happened over the past few days, about the company, about me, and about what comes next." He glanced at the back row where Graves stood quietly near the door, arms folded. Off to the side sat Marcia Ellis and her daughter Zariah, invited personally. Jonathan continued, "This company was nearly overtaken by silence. Not just from those who plotted against it, but from me, from all of us who saw signs and ignored them, who trusted comfort over clarity." The cameras zoomed in slightly. A conspiracy unfolded beneath our noses. A betrayal deeply personal. My wife, Karen Ree, conspired with an outside party to remove me from both this company and this world. She failed. A quiet gasp echoed through the room. Jonathan paused, then added, "But let me be clear. This is not a speech about revenge. This is a declaration of responsibility because I didn't just survive an attack. I survived my own blindness. And I owe that to someone unexpected."
He turned toward the side of the room where Zaraya sat still, small hands clasped tightly in her lap. This girl, he said, voice softening, saw what no one else did. She acted when no one would. And because of her, we are here, not at a funeral, but at a beginning. The crowd broke into applause, not the polite kind, but something honest and building. Jonathan waited for silence. From this moment forward, Reese will fund a national initiative called the Ellis Watch, a youth-led safety and awareness program in underserved communities. It will be led by educators, parents, and children because sometimes it takes young eyes to see what grown ones won't. Another round of applause. He stepped away from the microphone. No questions, no spin, just truth. Later that afternoon, he sat with Zaraya in the Reese courtyard. The sun glinted off the steel sculpture near the fountain, and a few birds flitted between the trees. I hate cameras, Zaraya said quietly, swinging her legs over the edge of the bench. Jonathan smiled. They hate me, too. She looked at him. Will they still try to hurt you? He didn't lie. Maybe, but we're ready now. She nodded solemnly. Good, 'cause next time I might not be looking out the window. He chuckled. Then I better keep earning your protection. Zaraya pulled something from her jacket pocket. It was a sketch, crisp, clean pencil lines, more confident than before. It showed Jonathan standing in a crowd of people, but only one child was tugging his sleeve, pointing toward a shadow behind him. This is what happened, she said. Jonathan studied it, eyes lingering on the shadow. You have a gift, Zaraya. Not just for seeing, for showing. She shrugged. It helps me remember. He folded the sketch gently and placed it in his coat pocket. It helps me remember too. Across town in a sterile interrogation room, Devon Merrick sat shackled to the floor, head lowered. Two detectives questioned him calmly. No shouting, no drama. But he remained silent. Only when they asked, "Did Karen Ree give you the money directly?" did he lift his head. She didn't have to, he murmured. She looked at me. That was enough. The detectives exchanged a glance. What did she promise? Devon stared at the metal table. That I'd finish what Kyle started. That I'd be the reason people finally feared Jonathan Ree. And now Devon looked up, eyes hollow. Now I'm the reason people remember the girl instead. The following day, Jonathan returned to the Ellis home with guards or business cards, but with something heavier. Marcia opened the door, surprised. Mr. Ree, I have something to show you. She let him in and they sat in the same living room as before, sunlight spilling across the floor. Zaraya watched from the hallway. Jonathan placed a legal document on the coffee table. This is a deed. The house is paid off. It's yours permanently. No mortgage, no tricks. Marcia's breath caught. Why would you? Because you raised a child who saved a man like me. And I don't want her to ever worry about where she's sleeping again. Oh, tears welled in Marcia's eyes, but she said nothing. Jonathan stood slowly. There's one more thing. He turned to Zaraya. I want to commission a mural at our headquarters, a permanent one. And I want you to design it. Zaraya blinked. Me? Yes, he said.
It'll show the moment someone saw the truth. The moment everything changed. She didn't answer at first. Then, can I put birds in it? He smiled. As many as you want.
That night, alone on his rooftop, Jonathan watched the city below flicker with life. His world had been cracked open, exposed, and reassembled in less than a week. He had lost a wife, survived a murder attempt, uncovered a plot years in the making. But what stayed with him wasn't the betrayal. It was the voice of a child, high and firm, small but certain. Don't open that door. That voice had ripped through his sleepwalking life and returned something he hadn't known he lost. A reason to keep going. He looked at the skyline and whispered almost to himself, "You gave me back the part they couldn't kill." He didn't mean Zariah alone. He meant something even deeper. Hope. The mural took 2 weeks to design and another 4 to paint. It stretched across a central wall in the Reese Innovation Wing where hundreds of employees passed each morning on their way to meetings, deadlines, and decisions. But now they slowed their pace. They stopped. They stared. At the center of the mural was a tall figure, a man cast in cool tones of gray and slate blue, frozen mid-step, one hand reaching for a door. Behind him, shadows loomed, subtle but unmistakable, wires coiled like snakes, faces half hidden, intentions obscured. But just in front of him, breaking through the darkness, stood a child in green, small but steady. Her arm was outstretched, palm up, mouth open in a silent cry, "Stop!" Around them, the city rose in sharp angular lines. But overhead, the sky was filled with birds, dozens, all different shapes and sizes. In motion, in flight. Jonathan stood before it on a Monday morning, flanked by department heads and a small group of guests, including Marcia and Zariah Ellis. Zariah wore a navy dress and white sneakers, the soles just slightly scuffed from climbing ladders and paint scaffolding. The crowd clapped politely. A few even cheered, but Jonathan didn't step forward to speak. Instead, he turned to Zariah. She hesitated, then walked forward. "I made this so people would remember," she said softly, voice catching in the mic not just what happened, but what almost did. She turned to look at Jonathan. Sometimes people need help seeing, even grown-ups. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. Jonathan smiled. Zariah glanced back at the mural. "I think people forget that being small doesn't mean you're not strong." A longer pause. Then she stepped away. The applause came slower this time, but heavier, truer. Later, after the ceremony, Jonathan walked her back to the car where Marcia waited. "You were incredible," he said. Zariah shrugged. "I was nervous." "You didn't show it." "I practiced in the mirror," she whispered. 38 times. Jonathan chuckled. "Next time, try 37. That one was perfect." He knelt beside her. "You know this mural, it'll outlive all of us. People will pass by for decades. They might forget the names, but they'll see the girl, the light, and that's what matters." Zariah looked at him seriously. "Will you forget?" His smile faded into something quieter. "Not for the rest of my life." 2 days later, Jonathan stood in a courtroom wearing a dark suit and a quiet expression. Across the aisle, Karen sat beside her legal team, arms folded, face unreadable. She hadn't tried to contact him since her arrest. Not a call, not a letter.
She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, the insurance fraud, the digital trails, the conspiracy to commit murder. Devin Merrick's testimony sealed it. But Jonathan didn't come to speak for vengeance. When the judge asked if he had a statement, he stood slowly. "I'm not here to beg for punishment," he said. "I'm here because I believed in someone for years, and I missed every sign that belief had rotted." He turned toward Karen. "You were the closest person in my world, and I didn't just lose a partner. I lost the man I was when I still trusted you." A long breath. "But what you took, someone else gave back." A stranger, a child, someone who had no reason to care. She screamed because she saw the truth. "And in doing that, she saved not just my life, but my soul." Karen's eyes flickered. "I will carry what you did forever, but not because it broke me, because it reminded me who I refused to become." He stepped away. The sentence came swiftly. 15 years. No parole for conspiracy and attempted murder. Karen blinked once, then lowered her head. The sound of the gavel rang sharp in the room. Final. Cold. Jonathan walked out without looking back. That weekend, he didn't return to the city. Instead, he drove north along the coast, up where the cliffs met the ocean, and the air smelled like salt and eucalyptus. Alone, no driver, no staff, just a car, a duffel bag, and a notebook. At a quiet overlook, he sat on a bench facing the sea. He opened the notebook and wrote a single line. "It almost ended before I understood what it all meant." Then, below it, "Now I see, and I won't close my eyes again." He stayed there until sunset, the horizon turning gold and bruised violet. The waves whispering against the shore below. When he stood to leave, he felt lighter, not empty, but aired out. Like grief had passed through him, swept clean by truth and time. His phone buzzed. It was a photo from Graves. Zariah standing next to the mural again, only this time she had added something, a new figure in the background. Not a villain, not a monster, just a silhouette of a woman walking away, head bowed. Beside her, a trail of unraveling thread. She'd signed it in the corner. Z age 9. Jonathan smiled, pocketed the phone, and walked toward his car. No security detail waited. No Ferrari, just a man who had faced the worst of betrayal and the best of humanity, and finally knew which one had shaped him more. It was a Wednesday morning when Jonathan Ree returned to the place where everything had begun. Not his company, nor his marriage, but the exact patch of pavement where his life had nearly ended. The quiet cul-de-sac in Pasadena still looked the same. Same neat hedges, same trimmed grass, same sprinkler ticking steadily across the neighbor's lawn. The only difference was the yellow Porsche was long gone. He had sold it the day after Karen's sentencing. He stepped out of the black SUV and walked to the edge of the driveway, pausing by the spot where Zariah had stood that morning, barefoot and wide-eyed, shouting at a stranger to stop. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stood still, letting the air and memory settle around him like dust. Hard to believe, isn't it? Jonathan turned. Marcia Ellis approached from the walkway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him with a soft smile. "Thought I saw your car. Didn't mean to disturb." "You're not," Jonathan said, accepting the cup. "She's not," she replied. Zariah's at school. She made me promise I'd tell you she's entering the mural in a statewide youth art contest. Jonathan chuckled. She'll win if they're smart. She said it doesn't matter, Marcia added. She just wants people to see it. Ha! Jonathan sipped the coffee. She's right. That's all that matters now. They stood together in silence, watching the quiet street as a mail truck pulled in at the far corner. She ever asked about Karen? Marcia asked gently. Once. Jonathan replied. She asked if I hated her. And what did you say? That I didn't. But I wouldn't waste any more love on her either. Marcia nodded. Wise answer. He took a deep breath, let it out slow. I used to think betrayal was the end of something, the collapse of everything good. But it's not. It's a reset. A violent kind of grace. Marcia looked at him sideways. Did you come here just to say that? He smiled faintly. No. I came to say goodbye to the street. To what happened here? Marcia didn't respond, but she reached out and touched his forearm briefly. It was the kind of gesture people used when they didn't have the right words, but still wanted to say, I see you. I understand. Jonathan nodded once, turned and walked back toward the SUV. But halfway to the car, he paused. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded drawing Zariah had given him months ago, one of the man and the girl in the tunnel of shadows. He looked at it a moment, then carefully walked to the base of the tree at the curb and placed it inside a plastic envelope beneath the roots, not to forget, but to leave something behind. 3 weeks later, Zariah stood beside Jonathan in a marble hallway in Washington, D.C. The building was old with high ceilings and columns that stretched like arms into the sky. They were attending the national ceremony for community impact in youth advocacy. Zariah had been nominated as the youngest recipient in the event's history. She wore a navy blue blazer and silver sneakers. Jonathan had insisted she dress however she felt comfortable. The shoes, she'd said, are non-negotiable. Ugh. They waited in line for the press photo. Zariah shifted nervously, adjusting the collar of her blazer. You nervous? Jonathan asked. A little, she whispered. Mostly just hoping I don't trip. If you do, he said, smiling. Well, just pretend it was part of your speech. She smirked. The event proceeded in a blur: photos, applause, a short speech from a senator, and finally Zariah walking on stage to receive her award. She kept her words short. I didn't mean to be brave. I just knew something was wrong and I knew if I stayed quiet, someone might get hurt. So, I yelled. Pause. Then she added, I think that counts. The crowd laughed, then stood, applauded. After the event, Jonathan knelt beside her, tying the loose shoelace on her sneaker. You know, he said. When I was your age, I didn't even know what courage meant. Zariah looked at him. I still don't. I just did the thing my chest told me to do. He smiled. That's exactly what courage is. She tilted her head. Is your chest better now? He hesitated, then nodded. Much better. Not all the way. But enough. She looked down at the golden plaque in her hands. Do you ever get scared again?
Sometimes, he admitted.
But I remember the sound of your voice and that helps. Zariah beamed.
Then maybe I should yell at you more often.
Jonathan laughed,
the sound rolling out of him lighter than he'd felt in years. Months later, the mural at Reese was featured in an article titled "The Wall That Watched Over Us." It was picked up by a national magazine. Visitors came from all over to see it, to touch the brush strokes, to whisper to their children. This was painted by a little girl who saved a man's life. Jonathan had the article framed, but he kept the frame in his home office, not the boardroom. And on his desk, beside all the executive summaries and investment pitches, sat a single photo.
It wasn't of Karen. It wasn't of Devon. It wasn't even of Zariah.
It was the drawing, now laminated, of a man about to walk into a shadow and a child stopping him in his tracks with nothing more than instinct and a heart wide open. He looked at it every morning and every evening because it reminded him of the one moment where everything that mattered was saved, not by power, not by money, but by a voice, a small one, but the only one that spoke up. And that, he had learned, was what heroes were made of. Brought to you by Bup Stories.